Hello and welcome to this video on the playlist of dermatology cases. Today I want to talk to you about some more important cases in dermatoscopy. Actually, the subject of dermatoscopy requires several videos, but here I'll give you an overview of dermatoscopy. In other videos, I'll discuss this subject in more detail. I'm Dr. Navetria, board certified dermatologist. The images here are extracted from some box videos and examination. Let's jump into cases. Question 1. This pattern of dermoscopy is compatible with which tumor? As you see here, there is arborizing vessels, indicative of basal cell carcinoma. And here you see several images depicting arborizing vessels. Here, and here are arborizing vessels indicative of basal cell carcinoma. Question 2. Vascular dermoscopy of which one is compatible with Bowen? You see here comma-shaped pattern, here hairpin pattern, here dotted pattern, and here glomerular pattern. As you know, the comma-shaped pattern is compatible with nevus, actually dermal nevus. Hairpin pattern is indicative of a keratinization pattern, like what's seen in seborrheic keratosis or SCC. Dotted pattern is an important pattern in dermoscopy that is indicative of melanoma and to somewhat Spitz nevus. But glomerular pattern is indicative of Bowen disease. So the correct answer here is 4. Which one is compatible with melanoma on dermoscopy? As said before, dotted pattern is indicative of melanoma. Here we have red lacunes that is indicative of hemangioma. Here we see red homogeneous areas intersected by white lines that is indicative of pyogenic granuloma, and here is milky red areas that is indicative of melanomas. So this figure is indicative of melanoma. Vascular patterns that are indicative of melanoma, as said before, is dotted pattern, and here milky red areas, and another pattern is linear vascular pattern. So the three vascular pattern indicative of melanoma are dotted, linear, and milky red areas. Which images is related to this dermoscopy? What you see here is red lacunes that is suggestive of hemangioma. So here the one is more compatible with this dermoscopy. Other histopathology here are as 2 that is indicative of pyogenic granuloma. 3, as you see here, there are basophilic islands with palisading in the dermis that is indicative of basal cell carcinoma, and here you see the histopathology look like sebaceous hyperplasia. And here in this slide it is an overview of findings of hemangioma, vascular and endothelial cell proliferation, vascular spaces containing red blood cells, and here on dermoscopy, red lacunes. Which one is compatible with the clinical image in the left? The clinical image in the left is indicative of pyogenic granuloma. As said before, red areas intersected by white line is compatible with the dermoscopy of pyogenic granuloma as what we see here in the one. But the 2 is red lacunes that is indicative of hemangioma. And here in 3 we see some vascular pattern in the periphery as the crown that is indicative of sebaceous hyperplasia. And here is the milky red areas as what's seen in melanoma. You see here an overview of pyogenic granuloma, the histopathology as the presence of colored and vascular homogeneous proliferation in the dermis, and here the red homogeneous area intersected by whitish lines as you see here in these figures. And here, which pattern? As said before, there is the crown pattern in the periphery for vascular pattern, and in the center you see some yellowish areas that is compatible with the diagnosis of sebaceous hyperplasia, crown vessels in the periphery. Which pattern? You see here some structure resembles to a strawberry like structure that is a finding of actinic keratosis. Which pattern? As said before, you see here red lacunes. That is suggestive for hemangioma. Red lacunes. You see here a comparison between red lacunes in the left suggestive of hemangioma and red homogeneous intersected by white lines suggestive of pyogenic granuloma in the right. And here is a comparison between pyogenic granuloma, hemangioma, and angiokeratoma. Pyogenic granuloma, red homogeneous intersected by whitish line, red lacunes here indicative of hemangioma, and what you see here on dermoscopy of angiokeratoma, as said before in the video of oral disease, are a figure that resembles to pyogenic granuloma, but the color of balls here are more darker in comparison with pyogenic granuloma. And which pattern here? You see here a comma shaped vascular pattern that is indicative of nevus. And another finding here is brown color that also is compatible with the diagnosis of nevus. What's the diagnosis? What you see here is a bluish red discoloration. Bluish red discoloration in general is indicative of vascular tumors. And also there is a scaly surface. These findings are indicative of Kaposi sarcoma. There is both brown color and vascular pattern here, indicative of a keratinization and also vascular pattern here. This vascular pattern looks like glomerular pattern. These findings are indicative of Bowen disease. Both keratinization here and glomerular pattern here. You see here some 2, to somewhat arborizing, and here leaf-like structure that is indicative of basal cell carcinoma. Here the leaf-like structure. Leaf-like structure is a finding that is indicative of keratinization process more related to basal cell carcinoma. What's the diagnosis? Arborizing vessel here and leaf-like structure, leaf-like pattern, basal cell carcinoma. This slide is also compatible with the diagnosis of basal cell carcinoma as the presence of a spoke wheel structure here. But in this slide, this pattern of a spoke wheel is more prominent. So arborizing vessel, leaf-like pattern, and spoke wheel pattern are all indicative of basal cell carcinoma. What's the diagnosis? Clinical image. An island of basophilic color with palisating in the periphery, and here a dermoscopy look like a spoke wheel structure. All are suggestive of basal cell carcinoma. And here you see a spoke wheel and leaf-like structure that is also indicative of basal cell carcinoma. But one diagnosis that should be kept in differential diagnosis of basal cell carcinoma in dermoscopy is poroma. A case that is mostly proposed on the plantar surface in clinical image, and the histopathology may resemble to superficial basal cell carcinoma. And on dermoscopy, what we see are polymorphous vascular structure. These polymorphous vascular structure may be linear vascular, may be dotted vascular, so in question may resemble to melanoma. But we should keep in mind that these findings of clinical image, histopathology image, and dermoscopy image, all in mind that all of them are suggestive of poroma. You see here a case of poroma. You see here both dotted and linear vascular structure. But the histopathology here is helpful in diagnosing of poroma. The histopathology of poroma resembles to what we see in histopathology of superficial basal cell carcinoma. Polymorphous vascular pattern. And you see here the dermoscopy that are indicative of seborrheic keratosis. Milial-like structure, comedo-like structure, hairpinned or lobulated structure, and leaf-like structure. So the leaf-like structure, as said before, is a finding in keratinization process that is not only confined to the diagnosis of basal cell carcinoma, but also could be found in seborrheic keratosis. But when the leaf-like structure and arborizing vessel is mentioned in one question, so the diagnosis is more compatible with the diagnosis of basal cell carcinoma. But when the leaf-like structure is presented with, for example, comedal-like structure or miliary-like structure, the diagnosis of seborrheic keratosis is more suggested. Which pattern? This pattern is also indicative of seborrheic keratosis that called brain-like pattern. Brain-like pattern. What's the diagnosis? This is also suggestive of seborrheic keratosis. That is called the hyperkeratosis or fissured pattern. Hyperkeratosis or fissured pattern. You see here fissure-like structure and ridge-like structure. What's the diagnosis? This slide resembles to brain-like pattern. It's called cerebriform pattern. The cerebriform pattern or brain-like pattern look like the cerebriform pattern look like the brain-like pattern, and both are suggestive of seborrheic keratosis. Brain-like pattern and here the cerebriform pattern. Which pattern? This pattern here is rhomboid, that is suggestive of lentigo maligna. It was the board question. Don't mistake this pattern as rhomboid pattern with what we see here as cerebriform or brain-like pattern of seborrheic keratosis. This is brain-like pattern, and here is rhomboid pattern that is suggestive of lentigo maligna. Another question on melanoma is distinguishing acral nevus from melanoma. In acral nevus, the deep side or the furrow are involved, but in melanoma, the line or ridge are involved without involvement the deep area or the furrow. So, it was a board question. Dermoscopy of plantar surface, what is the diagnosis? As you see here, the ridge are involved without involvement of furrow. So the diagnosis of acral melanoma. So, on melanoma, the board questions up to now were rhomboid pattern for lentigo maligna, ridge pattern for acral melanoma, and here, which pattern? As you see here, there is dotted pattern that is indicative of melanoma and Spitz nevus as said before. And here, the milky red pattern is also indicative of melanoma. Milky red pattern. It is also another board question. You see here the dotted nevus, the dotted pattern. That this case is also compatible with the diagnosis of melanoma. Pruritic lesion. What you see here is a thread-like structure. In history, pruritic lesion. These findings are in favor of the pathognomonic burrow structure of scabies. And here, as said before in the video of hair disease, are comma-shaped structure indicative of tinea. Comma-shaped structure in trichoscopy, and common shape in vascular pattern that is indicative of nevus. And here is an overview of alopecia areata dermoscopy pattern: yellow dot, vellus hair here, black dot, and exclamation finding or tapering hair in proximal side. And what's the diagnosis? What you see here is a central scar-like patch with peripheral delicate network that is indicative of dermatofibroma. I hope you enjoyed this video. In other videos, I'll continue other cases.